Okay, we're going to get started in just a minute, but I see we've had some more people joining us in the past few minutes. If you haven't done so already, please use the chat box at the right of the screen to tell us who you are, where you're from. And if you've got anybody joining you for this webinar today, please let us know who they are as well. And just as it says on the screen, if the chat window isn't open on your computer, just click on the chat icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And it is 2 o'clock, at least by my clock. So we're going to get started here. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Transfer of Electronic Records, Metadata Collection, and Accession Validation with Bagger. I'm Bonnie Weddle. I am the coordinator of the Electronic Records Unit at the New York State Archives, and I am also the chair of CoSA's State Electronic Records Initiative Education and Programming Subcommittee. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing series of webinars. And just to give you a preview of what's coming up, we're still trying to get April nailed down. We have a speaker who may present in April, may present in June. But we do have a definite confirmation for Friday, not a usual day for a CoSA webinar, but Friday, May 18th, Marissa Bruns of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is going to be giving a presentation on electronic records processing workflows. If you were lucky enough to attend the 2017 Best Practices Exchange, you may recall that Marissa gave a very, very well-received presentation on processing workflows, and she has graciously agreed to provide an updated version via webinar for CoSA. There are some additional offerings in the works. We will be taking a break over the summer as conference season really heats up, but we have a couple of things definitely on deck for the fall. But to return to today's offering, we're very fortunate to have two fantastic presenters with us. Thibaut Huzamne is currently working as a consultant on digital preservation, records, and archives management. He is formerly the digital archivist at the state of Indiana and has been working as an associate audiovisual archivist for the United Nations in the Netherlands. Thibaut holds a master's in library science, or pardon me, in archives and records management from Indiana University Bloomington, and he is also an ARMA certified information governance professional. Camille Tyndall-Walton is the digital services section head at the State Archives of North Carolina. She holds a master's degree in library science with a concentration in archives and records management from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's worked with a number of other repositories as well. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Thibaut. Okay, Thibaut, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. I was trying to unmute myself. Well, welcome to this webinar. We will try to learn together about accessing digital records and debating what's important. And as a guide for this session today, it's really not rigid. It's just a guide. So based on your interest, we could change and go deeper in some other areas that you're interested in. I would first like to make some acknowledgments and review really briefly in a different manner what I believe metadata is and what are the core metadata that actually might be useful that most digital archivists agree on collecting, and what may be additional metadata when it comes to digital records accessions and the digital preservation, with particular focus onto what may be important to collect to be able to properly manage records. And as far as how to install Bagger, I will leave that to instructions, which are fairly detailed, and we'll look at how to create your bag and why it's important to actually map your bags filled to a digital preservation system that will finally receive those records, or your electronic records management system. I will also look at how to adopt a profile, and how to approach your strategy in terms of building your own profile, and what might be good examples of who to collaborate with. Then I will talk about my experience at the Indiana Archives and Record Administration, then leave it up to Camille to talk about North Carolina's experience doing the same. Then we really will prefer to have questions and contributions, because questions and answers are kind of old. We don't think we have all the answers, and we hope that your contributions will actually help us all in extending our understanding and knowledge about this topic. Before I move forward, I would like to probably reflect a little bit on who this session might be useful to. If you have been recruited as digital archivist, or you find yourself in that role, and you do not have any digital preservation systems or anything fully functional, yet there are digital records that have been created or in, or state agency calls you up and say, well, I need to send my records to you, my digital records, then you really don't know what to do. I have been there. I understand, and we dealt with it. Or if you expect to receive digital records occasionally or frequently, or if digital records are currently being created in your state, and with no plan on when you're going to receive it, it actually is going to be good to really focus on this and get ready for those when those records come in. With that, I would like to make some acknowledgement real quick. I would like to particularly thank Jim Corridon for having given me the opportunity that I've had. I was nobody until he hired me, until he accepted me as an intern, and then hired me later on. While working for him, I have had the opportunity to work on some interesting projects, and one of which is using BagIt and creating metadata application profile in collaboration with the Library of Congress developer. And once the profile was created, then he also allowed us to share it on GitHub. So thank you for that. And I also would like to extend my thanks to Sarah Combs, State Archivist of North Carolina, who has been relentless in inviting me to come do this presentation. I think, Sarah, you're a real gem identifier. If I need to buy anything of value, I would certainly trust your judgment on that. To all the education subcommittee folks, I would like to say thank you for the nitty-gritty planning for us to be here today. That said, it's kind of important that I specify for two reasons: that I am not an agent for the Indiana Archives and Record Administration currently, because I do not work there, and neither am I an agent for the United Nations, even though I hold the status of international civil servant. It is important there is no conflict of interest perceived or tacit with regard to my intervention with CoSA. So things we say here today will be our opinion, and things that are in public domain and do not represent, do not tie any of our former employers to our opinion. And I think it's kind of also good to bring down the ball and say that this is an archival community exercise and learning together, and we should all be good to focus and contribute what we know and how best we can. So I will look forward to your experiences and your sharing. Without further ado, let's dive into the topic. I'm sure I am trying to sell water to fishermen. You all know what metadata is. We all learned it in library school or somewhat. But I'd like you to focus on these two examples, these two images, the one on the left and the one on the right. I am sure very many people know what's on the left, but I don't. But if anybody wondered what's really in those bottles, then they're right. there is no label. And on the right side, looks like wine. We can all assume it is, but if we go closer, we'll be able to identify that those labels tell us what they are. So the two differences. The differences in those two images are, one, we have label, and the other one, we do not. So label actually help us understand what we're looking at. And I would like us to think of metadata here today in terms of label we put on stuff. Right in the middle there is also a bottle. Doesn't look like much, but it's actually the Storage Networking Industry Association's representation of digital records package for long-term retention. That is their logo, and it sort of represents what we're talking about very well. And I'm going to use it. That bottle symbolizes, it looks like a CD that's inside just to symbolize digital records. And there is also a piece of paper. When you encounter that logo, you will see that there's instructions. There's a label inside the bottle. The idea of packaging for long-term retention is a self-described content inside a container. So there will be a label inside that says what it is, and there will be a label outside that says what it is. And everything is bagged or bottled, or any term you can use, containerized. There's plenty of terms that go around zipped. It doesn't really matter. Can you imagine that bottle tossed at sea? We can all think in a week or so, the label on the outside will probably vanish, and that bottle, if you catch it 50 years later, will still show you the label inside. If, let's say, the cap survives, and it also survives swallowing by sharks. That said, and moving my slide, metadata is the label that actually helps identify, understand, find or locate, classify somewhat to allow us to protect, secure, or share appropriately, better use records, and overall metadata should help us reduce error. That's my way of reviewing metadata. I'm sure there's plenty of definitions to go around. And what may be core metadata that most organizations, institutions, and countries agree on to collect when describing records? Most likely, it covers what records are, which are titles, who created them, meaning creator or agent, when were they created, the date, meaning many dates, beginning date, digitization date, end date, why were they created in terms of functions and purpose, where they are in terms of security classifications and what to do with them exactly, what locations or where can we find them, how much are they, how many are they, and what forms do they take in terms of format, and how much is actually an expense. So just contrasting a little bit of the generic terms that are used and that most people can understand, and archival specific terms that we use, sort of our jargon. The point here is that these are somewhat the essential records, metadata for patrons. If it works for the patrons, it should work for us. But what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander, because we are not just about identifying what, who, when, why, where, how much, and in what form. We're making decisions about those records. And as such, we actually need more metadata. So, if you look at digital records and you're actually trying to wrap your mind around the decision you can make about them, or even describing them. If they're records, are you taking in a submission information packet? Is it an archival information packet? Is it a dissemination information packet? Or is it just, I'm making this up, a metadata information packet? I mean, what type of record is it? And what is the stage of preservation as defined by OAIS? So when you're taking record, you really want to make sure you specify that, because that will influence the decisions you make about it later. If it's just JPEG images that are digitized from physical records, you really want to say that, because you don't want to mistake one for an original, because that would impact the decision you make and how you preserve them in your system and what kind of access copies that are created from those originals. You also want to look at the birth means. How was it born? Is it born digital, or was it reformatted? Was it digitized, and how was it digitized? Archives are wonderful because they only carry unique records. So it's kind of important to actually specify the uniqueness of the record you're accessioning. Are they surrogate, where the original kept? Are they de facto original because the originals, physical original, were destroyed or deleted? Or are they digital just by the simple nature and being original, and there's no other format available anywhere? It's really good to specify that, because that will influence whether you should do multiple copies to keep stuff safe, or if you actually, that one copy you have is good enough, or perhaps one too many. It may be important also to document whether these are vital records, because an open record can still be vital. A confidential record can still be vital, sensitive. Otherwise, it depends on the nature. A confidential record can be, part can be redacted and made open. So that might be something to specify when you're describing the records. I'm not saying that everyone should actually use all these descriptors and these concepts, but those are something to think about before making choices about creating a profile. The point of this here is that metadata are needed to be collected first before we can make decisions about how best to preserve or share or secure records. And with that, I will briefly try to explain why having a metadata application profile, or map, is important, and perhaps why use BagIt to do this. Creating a metadata application profile helps you harmonize and unify your vocabulary and how you actually name each field, because there's quite a bit of controversy that go around. Reasonable folks can disagree forever about what to name anything, and you give them a limited amount of time, they will continue disagreeing forever. They never agree. So it's good to come together and harmonize these terms and say, this is what we're going to call it. We're going to call it title, or we're going to call it name. There's still that debate going on. And why BagIt? Because BagIt will allow you to accomplish that. If you agree first, then you can use those terms that you already agree on to use for each field name. This could also be achieved as a community, and you can also harmonize your field names and review your process for accessing the records. It's good to have harmony. Related to metadata application profile as well, it allows you to have the reusable forms. Reusable forms are actually useful because you design it once and you just keep using it, just like the form we use for state, any functions, any applications. It helps you with consistency, with the field name, and even what kind of data value, what you're going to type into the form and what is expected. It also helps with structuring your data that you're collecting, so you can further automate, because when things are not structured, automation is extremely hard. Not impossible, but it just requires much more money, much more technology, resources, and time to even understand what's in there. Having a metadata application profile will also help improve findability once you're accessing records using it. And BagIt will allow you to do it by helping you identify and understand records and know which records to actually protect, which ones to secure, and which one you really shouldn't have to apply so much security to, because it makes no point to put both vital records and open record you have 5 copies of under the same state security. It's actually a waste of security resources. Focus on what matters, and what doesn't, use the least security. Your metadata application profile also will help you document preservation decisions and actions. As you collect them, those metadata that matter for preservation, you have in mind that you are going to make decisions later, and it's kind of actually good to think about it now to know what you're going to collect, why you should collect them, and what you're going to use those metadata fields for. And BagIt allows you to accomplish that, and it helps you validate your accessions and integrity of the records. And BagIt is adaptable. You can create a profile in it and change it based on what you actually use or need. So the point is, we'll remember, map your bag. Metadata application profile or map in your bag in what you create using BagIt. Now, how do you install BagIt? Actually, I want to apologize that we really didn't want to get into too much technical, but we put together the list of resources that you might need to first understand and create your own profile. Whether it's how to install BagIt, Library of Congress has a 3-minute tutorial on BagIt. State Archive of North Carolina has also created a 3-part tutorials on BagIt. For detailed installation, there are instructions on GitHub from Library of Congress. And if you really want to dive deeper into more about why to create a profile, how to create a profile, what goes into creating a profile, then there are 2 articles written for 2 different publics. One by the Indian Archive and Record Administration together with the Library of Congress, titled BagIt's Enhancement for Digital Accessions. And that is for a wider audience, the Signal blog by the Library of Congress. And the second one is the Indian Archive and Record Administration's accession profile used in BagIt. And that one particularly is geared towards archivists, and it was published on the Society of American Archivists blog. That will give you more detail, and so you can actually create, adapt, or adopt a profile. And once you're done, share your profile in BagIt itself, on GitHub, or on the Digital Library Federation's Metadata Application Profile Clearinghouse. Here I'm going to go a little bit quicker. This really doesn't add you any value. Just so you see, here's where what the Library of Congress's video looks like, and there's a link right there. And here's the first part of the State Archive of North Carolina's video. It's 3-part video, and the link is also there for you to use. And here is, when you're creating your profile, you kind of want to perhaps brush up a little bit on the Json programming code, which I call Json dialect. It's not an extensive vocabulary at all, and not many people speak that language, so it's a dialect. Anyway, so that said, I will just say, if you take a quick look at the code, there's 1, 2, 3. The 4th line says still required true. To change profile, to change what is required and what's not, just change true to false. and it will make it completely optional to fill that field. And if you say field required true, then that makes it mandatory. And we'll see that later in Indiana's profile, initial profile. Once you finish your code, it's not very difficult. You can recognize the field name. All you have to do is change it to your own, and then set the requirement level for the field itself, if it's optional or if it's required. And once you're done, and you actually use your application profile to accession records using BagIt, this is an example of what the outcome will be. So this is a generic accession using the metadata profile of the Indiana Account of Record Administration. And as you can see, how we name the field in the code, that's exactly how it shows. And you will see to the right of the field name the values that are entered. And it keeps it structured. Every single one of the accessions will have every single one of the fields in the same order, and the values, if they are entered, to the right. If you're about to build your own profile, or if you're considering this, or if you like to, should you do it alone, or would you want to collaborate? The answer is yes or no. It depends. It's up to you. If you do, you could actually consider local governments, state agencies, colleagues from CoSA, and it's endless. So whoever wants to collaborate with you, who has similar needs, will be your best bet. The point is, if you really want to go fast, you can go alone, or if you want to go far, you go together. It's an African proverb. Kind of true. And once you're done, you could actually share your profile. For now, there's 3 ways. Inside BagIt itself, like Indiana did, on GitHub, the code's there for anybody to see, and in the clearinghouse as well. Once your profile is created and you test accessions and everything works well, what should you do with the bags that come out of it? First, you should think about the record management system or digital preservation system that will be ingesting those bags. And if you want to ingest the bag manually, then you have to actually make sure you enter those metadata manually. But if you want to automate this, then you already have structured metadata fields in your records in appropriate folder, so you can actually get even faster. So it's good to think about, and I'm not going to stress this enough. It is important to think about it carefully and have as many fields ready, because once you pay a developer to map your bags fields to your electronic record management system or your digital preservation system, and if you change it again, you add more fields, then you will have to pay the developer to add those additional fields, to map them. So think about it in terms of doing it once and using it always. In terms of practical view of a profile, this is Indiana's initial profile that we created, and you can see the field names on the left and the values entered on the right. Anywhere you see the capital R right before the values entered, that means this is a required field. And if there's nothing, then it's optional. So there's 2 profiles that were created, and one of the profiles is actually a generic one, so we remove all the requirements if any states, anyone wants to use these profiles to accession their digital records then they don't have to comply with the Indiana's requirements. And it's also optional for anyone to actually change it and make those profiles their own by choosing what's required for themselves and making anything else optional as well. The field names on the left actually are ordered to make sense and to cover your accession. If we look at it globally, they're divided into many subdivisions. You just don't see them like there because there's a limitation into how to split the metadata fields into different chunks. But overall, we have administrative metadata, which is, example, the session number, where does it come from, the provenance information. And you also have the aboutness of the records, which librarians usually mean what the record is about, but we probably call it recordness. What makes it a record? What's important? Why was it created? What's the functions? Retention schedule, record series, classification. And we also have authenticity tracking, which includes checksum, if that was done before the accession. And the accession also is received by whom. That's also part of the provenance and the receipt. In terms of what makes the digitalness of the records, how does it become digital? It's important to kind of specify whether it was digitized, whether it was born digital, and also point to the originality and the uniqueness. The generation might also be important because when you're looking at a digital records that had initially, it was a, let's say, let me think about this. Let's say a discolored background monster roll records was scanned using the best available technology and resolution and bit depth and yada yada. And that TIFF image, uncompressed, now was migrated into a JPEG. So if you don't say anything about that transformation, then you really won't understand why the record you're looking at today is of a crappy quality. So generation might be important to specify in terms of digitalness of the record. Authenticity is also very important to specify as well. So, and if you look at the two pages of the profile, you would easily identify as you go from the beginning to the last one how they're categorized. And we didn't just do this by dreaming it up. We've used the Enterprise Trust framework for authenticity. We've also looked at medium and carriers, and there's improvement to be made in how to name them, and that can be done as a community. But we sort of needed something to go. That's why we went, and not just alone. There's many states that actually helped us, and many colleagues that actually contributed to the debate and offered opinions, suggestions, and how they see things from practical view. And I know it's kind of a little bit ago, but I would definitely, if you read the articles, you will see the names. We recognize every single one of them that contributed and what they actually did. We're very grateful for the Inter-Paris Trust Project for particularly the value and appraisal component from a conceptual standpoint, because it's extremely detailed. The value for classification, value for the priority handling. If you will set rules in your storage system, say I would like all my vital records to be treated first in terms of backup, or to restore the system when things go down, then you should be able to do it if you have initially collected that metadata. If you want to specify value for the agency, what's this record's value for residents and citizens, What's the value for the state, the locality of the nation, and what's the overall value for anyone? You don't really have to collect them all, but it's good to have them there in case you're dealing with some vital records that actually need those fields recorded. Because if you stumble on the governor's first digital records, it's absolutely critical to make sure that you record those fields. And so when you're looking for things that actually have some value, then you're not scrubbing your head trying to remember or trying to go back to the first employee that have worked here that know this, because all that knowledge usually spread around people's heads and tacit knowledge. So you want to record this as you're dealing with each record as you go. That way you don't have to go back again to revisit them. And by the time your Accession is ready to be ingesting in your digital records or digital preservation system, you already have most of that information. Collect it once, and it will stick with the records as long as you keep them. So let's say you decided to create your metadata application profile, and you thought about your strategy. However you choose, collaborate or go out alone or just a few colleagues to support you, and you've created your profile. It would be really nice to share, because that way you could get the community's feedback, or you can keep it for yourself. If, for example, you work for the NSA and even the field name that you have for your collection is secret and shouldn't be disclosed, we understand that. Or you can share it and get feedback and help others. Whatever it is you do, remember Tim McGraw's song, Humble and Kind. When you get there where you're going, look back and help the next one in line. That said, we've seen why it's important to create a metadata application profile. We've also seen what BagIt brings, and we've also looked at Indiana's case and walked you through the steps and the resources that you need to create your own profile. With that, I will leave it up to Camille to talk about North Carolina's implementation case. Here we go.
Thanks, Eva. Hi, everyone. As previously introduced, my name is Camille Tyndall-Watson, and I'm the head of the Digital Services section at the State Archives of North Carolina. And I'm going to talk about how I've been working on integrating the metadata profiles in BagIt in North Carolina specifically. To give you a little bit of background, we've been using BagIt for a while in North Carolina, probably about 5 or 6 years. There are a couple of different things that we use BagIt for here in North Carolina. The first is just validation of files between agencies and archives. Typically, bagging is done in North Carolina by folks at the state agencies, not necessarily records analysts, although our records analysts can and are willing to go over and help agencies if necessary with bagging materials. But generally, our agencies are pretty good about that. Or our vendors will bag it if we're doing an outsourced digitization order. The only time our archivists really do an awful lot of bagging other than that is if we're getting special collections materials. Sometimes we will bag it at time of donation once it hits our door. But however we do it, it's very helpful for us for chain of custody, as well as knowing for sure that the records that sat on a state agency's computer are the same things that are coming to us, to our preservation environment. We also find that BagIt is really helpful for doing a validation of files over time. Generally, once a year in North Carolina, we have an inventory, and during that time, there's generally some sampling, and we use BagIt to be able to revalidate things to make sure that we haven't had any issues with our with our storage and preservation environment that we were not aware of during the year. So this is a very simplified version of what happens to files when they come to our doors. But essentially what happens as far as how we use BagIt is that the electronic files are living on a computer somewhere at a state or local agency. That agency staff will bag those files typically to a hard drive. Very rarely do we have FTP transfers. Usually it tends to be to a hard drive. But so they will bag the materials to a hard drive. That hard drive is sent to us at the State Archives. Whether that is an analyst goes and gets it, they bring it to us, however that ends up happening. At that point, our digital archivist will take the hard drive on a non-networked computer. We will validate the bag and quarantine the drive after it's been virus scanned. If it fails validation or the virus scan at this point in the workflow, we'll work with the agency to figure out next steps. Frequently, the agency will just rebag the materials and resend it, and that tends to take care of the problem. Viruses, it's a little bit more, we have to make the decision in the moment based on what we're finding. But assuming everything goes well, after 30 days of quarantine, we revalidate, revirus scan, and move the virus-free validated bag into our preservation storage. Once it's moved, we validate the bag again just to make sure that nothing was lost or damaged in that move. We've had that happen before, so we're very careful about that. At which point, once everything is locked down in our preservation environment, we will wipe the hard drive itself or destroy it if the agency has asked us to do so. And then we have our bag living in our preservation environment so that we can validate it throughout the year as needed so that we can ensure the authenticity of the records that we're holding. So this has worked out pretty well for us over the last few years, but there are some challenges. Fortunately, our current workflow doesn't really capture metadata with the records. We do have a transfer form that agencies and records analysts fill out together regarding the contents of the bag, item number, format, lots of information that's captured on this form, but it's not captured with the electronic records. Additionally, because agencies are the ones bagging the materials, we need to figure out how to make our metadata needs very clear and simple to fill out. That way, they're not confused. We're not getting a million calls saying, I don't understand what this field means, but it's also getting us the information we need to make good archival decisions about how we're handling these records. So we decided, once we saw that Thibaut had been working on a metadata profile for Indiana, we want in on this. And we took a look at the metadata profile that they had, and we realized that it was capturing a lot of great information, but it might not be realistic for our transferring agencies to really be able to figure out and complete on their own. So we decided we will take this and adapt it to our needs here in North Carolina. So when we started, we thought that this would be simple. We would make one profile for the State Archives for transferring government records, and then maybe later down the road, we might do something for our special collections materials. At the end of the day, we ended up, our first draft had these fields. The stars, or excuse me, the asterisks indicate a required field. The carets indicate something where we had a controlled vocabulary and a drop-down menu. So as you can see, it's item number, our C number, which is record center number, transferring agency, so what agency sent it to us, creating agency subdivision, if they're coming from a specific division within an agency, they can put that in there. The transferring employee, which we find very helpful, if something does fail virus or validation, we know who to contact about getting another copy of those records. The receiving institution and the receiving institution address, we have that currently in our Json profile, default filled out with State Archives in North Carolina's information. Dates of records, the date range. the digital originality, and that is born digital or digital surrogate. Classification for access, is it confidential or not? Does it contain PII? Digital content structure, so the types of files, and any notes that there might be. So we're very lucky in North Carolina that we have a fantastic government records section who works with the digital services section on electronic records and gives us lots of feedback and is very supportive of what we're working on. So we took this profile to our folks in government records, and they gave us some really great feedback based on the fact that something we had not thought about was that state and local records are transferred to the custody of the state archives, and both use BagIt, and that's our requirement that they use BagIt. But sometimes the language that we use when we talk about state and local records is very different. And if we wanted to make sure that it was clear for both, we needed to adapt our language to make it so it would be clear not only for state agencies, but for transferring local agencies as well. To that end, we came up with a two-profile system. So at the end of the day, once we have this completed, we will have two profiles. There will be the state profile, which will be pretty much the same profile that we went over originally. We will also have a local profile. As you'll notice, there is not an item number here. There's a record series title. We have the transferring county name in addition to the transferring agency name and agency subdivision. And the rest of the information is pretty much the same, but we wanted to make sure that we were describing the fields accurately so that we would get the best information we could from our transferring agencies. So we're currently developing that. Once we've finished developing the profile, we will take this profile back to our government records folks for their approval. Once they give it the thumbs up and it gets the government records section seal of approval, we'll be putting up the profiles as a commit in GitHub. That's really important for us because most of our state agencies will just download BagIt from GitHub, and so if we can make sure that it's part of that download, we'll know that they have the correct metadata profiles. We're not going to start requiring them to use it right away. First, we're going to be working on updating our transfer forms and our documentation. As Thibaut mentioned earlier, we've got videos and a lot of documentation for BagIt right now that we've created. We're going to be updating that based on our current use of BagIt and including the metadata profile as part of that documentation. Once we update those forms and documentation, we'll start training staff and then state agencies, and at that point we'll be able to move into production of actually having the metadata profile actively used during the transfer of records. And so with that, I will transfer this back to me and we can start talking about your questions and ideas.
Okay. We do have about 10 minutes for questions. So if anybody does have a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Camille or Thibaut, if you have any questions for our attendees, please feel free to ask them.
Okay, I just wanted to point out so far that the use cases are a little bit different. Initially, Indiana's profile was intended for the election record archivist or archivists to use, and it was extremely detailed for that purpose. And we can see that North Carolina's use case, number 2, is for the agencies to use themselves. So there's a need for simplicity. So BagIt is that flexible. So depending on your needs and how it changes, you could adjust your profile to perfectly fit the needs. But I don't have any questions so far, so I'm looking forward to folks' questions or contributions. If they don't have questions and they want to share any experience, feel free.
Yeah. Just to build on top of that, is anyone else on who's attending the webinar today using BagIt? And if you're not using Bagger, are you using some sort of other tool for transfer or accessioning that bundles records and metadata together?
Yeah, it looks like this is Thibault again. It's just a feeling while folks are probably gathering their thoughts and typing. No, it's not always easy when they could just speak. There are some applications out there. Not many that I know, but I just kind of feel Bagger has it uses international standards. It's well known. BagIt is a well-known specification. And if there are tools out there that does the same, we would like to know.
Okay. All right. I see folks at the California State Archives have begun experimenting with Bagger, but are still kind of in the start of that process. And while we wait for other questions or comments to come in, I actually have a question for both. I will defer. And this actually is pretty much my question as well. Patsy would like to know, how did you get agencies to start using Bagger, and what kind of training was involved?
I would assume this question is for North Carolina.
All right. So I will admit we're already using Bagger when I started at the State Archives. I do know that there was extensive documentation created by our former digital archivist as far as creating videos, creating documentation that walks you through it. So there was a lot of work at the beginning to create documentation to make it clearer and easier. I also know, early on we were sending analysts out to bag materials. It was much more common when I first started for analysts to be in the field bagging things with agents, at least if they were local to Raleigh. That is not so much the case anymore. A lot of it has been that we've found a lot of success with the online documentation and training that we created, and so most people I've found are able to figure it out based on that documentation, as well as, of course, being open and available to any questions or problems they have. But typically, that's the type of training I've seen. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure of when we first rolled it out what that looked like, but now it is part of our requirement for transfer. We don't accept state agency transfers without them being bagged in the same way that we have our requirements for how records need to be boxed and labeled before they come to the archives in paper format.
Okay. Linda has another question. Camille, you mentioned transferring records through a hard drive. What do you do for correctional agencies where hard drives aren't allowed? Have you run into that situation?
We've not run into that situation yet. I'm sure it will be an issue eventually. As I'm not sure if this or not, actually. We do have access to FTP transfer. We use a license of ShareFile. The thing is with ShareFile is that it is very limited as far as the amount of data it can transfer. There are limits on that license that we have. So we tend not to use it for state agency transfers because most of them tend to outstrip its ability. But I'm sure whenever or if ever corrections needs to do a transfer, we will work with them to figure out a way of facilitating that.
I would side with you on that as well, and I would perhaps maybe caution a little bit about the need for training state agencies is real, and if one can keep up and enforce the policy, that's great. But in the end, the archivist is really there to collect the records. But we perhaps need to be cognizant on the fact that if we put too much on the record analysts or record coordinators, we might not even get those records. And the point is to get it off their hands and make sure we get metadata to start.
Okay. Liz would like to know what was the most difficult part of implementing Bagger?
For us, it was more getting it started because we were really first. We really needed a tool to get started, and there was not much out there except some basic profile. And as we started with the Library of Congress developer, we realized that some of the functionalities that it has today, it didn't have it. So we have to request those functionalities. Can you make a drop-down list available? And making sure we test with them until it's done, that's the most difficult part that we've encountered. I don't know about North Carolina.
Again, because I wasn't here when we first started rolling out Bagger, I'm not really sure what all of the hurdles were for really getting started before anybody had heard of Bagger. I know that whenever we're working with new people to get them acclimated to Bagger, some of it is just, it can be time intensive to basically be the IT support for making sure Bagger is set up correctly, helping people understand how to use it. I would imagine once we roll out the new metadata profile, people who have had Bagger on their machines forever, making sure that they understand that they actually do need to update the version of Bagger they have so that they have access to the profiles will probably be a challenge to rolling out the new metadata profiles into production.
I'm also noticing that Janine Rowe from Indiana has verified that they now use Simplicity successful to receive bags from agencies that did not use SFTP. So that is good implementation out there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. When you close out of this webinar screen, a brief evaluation, just 3 or 4 questions will pop up. We really do appreciate your feedback. We use the survey results to help us plan future webinars and other educational offerings. In addition, please keep abreast of what CoSA is up to via the website, the resources in the Resource Center, Twitter, or Facebook. I'd like to thank our participants, Camille and Thibault, for presenting today, and I'd like to thank you all for attending and for your interest. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.